Theodore Roosevelt here, and I have been called upon to share with you
10 fascinating facts about Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh, splendid! When you get to be president, you grow accustomed to people saying bad things about you, so some fascinating facts would be a welcome change. Let us proceed.
Number 1.
Theodore Roosevelt had his own museum at age 10. Indeed I did. My father had been helping to establish the American Museum of Natural History, and I was so fascinated by nature myself that my cousins and I created the Roosevelt Museum of Natural History right in my bedroom. There were snakes and frogs and turtles and birds, and unlike the American Museum, some of my animals were still alive, although not everyone in the house was happy about that.
Number 2.
Theodore Roosevelt was the youngest member elected to the New York State Assembly. Oh, too true, too true. After graduating from Harvard, I began taking an interest in politics. But my friends in the law and business, they just laughed it off. They told me that government was a low sort of business, not tended to by gentlemen, and I would be met by the most rough, brutal, and unpleasant people. And in some ways they were right. But I was all the more determined to see if I could handle the task. And with the help of Joe Murray, I campaigned about the 21st District and was handily elected at age 23 into the State Assembly. I did write to a friend saying that I would not go into politics after that year, but I proved myself wrong.
Number 3.
Theodore Roosevelt hunted and protected buffalo. Ah, yes, yes. And many people seem angered, or at the least confused, as to how one person could do both. But I have long believed in the spirited pursuit of wild game, provided it is sportsmanlike and not cruel or destructive to the entire species as a whole. I believe that hunting is necessary to control animal populations, while there are human-occupied lands and towns. But in cases such as the buffalo, hunters were destroying hundreds of that magnificent creature at a time, merely for the profit. I hunted down 2 buffalo in my lifetime, and I worked with the American Bison Society to help reintroduce hundreds of buffalo to the wildlife preserves. Both practices, I believe, were beneficial to the population.
Number 4.
Ah, yes. Theodore Roosevelt ran for mayor of New York City and lost. Both are correct. It was a stout fight, one that I did not necessarily believe I would win. But I was asked to stand as the Republican candidate in the mayoral contest, and against my wife's better judgment, I agreed. I was pitted against Abram Hewitt. He was a wealthy, moderate Democrat, and was also against Henry George, a man from the Labour Party who was mostly a bag of wind. I gave it a rattling good canvas, though, and I figured that even if I came in second, it would be all right. But I came in third, because the Republicans were so worried about the bag of wind winning that they voted for the Democrat instead. There is always room for a surprise in politics.
Number 5.
Theodore Roosevelt was almost in charge of taking out the trash. And I think some people thought that that was where I belonged, with the trash. William Strong was a progressive and had been elected mayor of New York City in a different election. Strong wanted to make a lot of strong changes, and he asked me if I would join him by serving as the commissioner for sanitation. I declined the offer, but I did turn up to work with Strong to clean up New York, at least in the police department.
Number 6.
Theodore Roosevelt was in law enforcement twice. Well, this is serendipitous indeed. This is what I was talking about with Mayor Strong. After I declined his offer to serve as sanitation commissioner, he asked me to serve on the police commission to help clean up corruption in the department. I suppose, since I had 6 years of experience taking on corruption in the Civil Service Reform Commission in Washington, D.C., I was qualified. Of course, about 10 years prior to that, in the Badlands, I was also a deputy sheriff, due to being chairman of the Little Missouri Stockmen's Association. I even brought in horse thieves to jail, 45 miles away from where I caught 'em, to show that justice could be served in the frontier. But I do not believe that is what got me the job in New York.
Number 7.
Theodore Roosevelt wrote 36 books. Even more, depending on how you count them. In between my many adventures, I still needed to make a living. And while I did not consider myself a great writer, my first book could rival the dictionary for dryness. But people seemed to enjoy what I wrote, and so I kept writing. I will say that I saved my best book for last, Theodore Roosevelt's letters to his children. My family, I think, brought out my best work.
Number 8.
Yes, Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Indeed I was. The Russians and the Japanese were at terrible odds with each other. The balance of world power was teetering. So I made the offer to have both sides come to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and try to come to a peaceable treaty. I made sure that neither side had a seeming advantage over the other. And both sides, both countries, I believe, came out on the other side with something that they could boast about when they returned home. And they gave me a medal for it. Of course, I was happy to have balance restored in the world, but I still took the prize.
Number 9.
A river in the Amazon was named for Theodore Roosevelt. Oh, yes. I was requested to explore a tributary in Brazil, one that led out to the Rio Arapuana, which emptied into the Amazon. It was formerly called the Rio da Duvida, the River of Doubt. My son Kermit and I had been hunting in Africa years before, and we thought we had a fair idea of how to prepare for this expedition. But it was completely different, and most of what we prepared was useless. And we lost good men. We almost lost me. But we persevered, and 5 months later we emerged at the arranged meeting point. They first called it the River Roosevelt, but eventually changed it to Rio Teodoro, which has a more adventurous sound to it, don't you think?
Number 10.
Theodore Roosevelt protected 230 million acres of land. Give or take an acre, but by Godfrey, yes. I strongly believed in conserving land for the public good over private gain. During my administration, I doubled the number of national parks and expanded others. But once I discovered that there was nothing that said I could not declare federal lands as protected, you can believe I started declaring. 18 national monuments, 51 bird sanctuaries, 4 national game reserves, over 150 national forests. And when you realize that certain people wanted to turn the Grand Canyon into a copper mine and Muir Woods redwood trees into furniture, well, you will understand why I had to act. By Godfrey, this has been fun. I am delighted that you have shared in these facts about me. And with hard work and perseverance, perhaps somebody someday might want to discover some fascinating facts about you.